So hello and welcome back to Palestine Deep Dive. Today, I'm very delighted to have Francesca Albanese with me. Francesca Albanese is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories. Francesca, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So, Francesca, let's start by asking you about the Palestinian prisoners. Because over the past 10 months, we have seen that the media, the Western media, have talked a lot about the Israeli hostages, as they should. I don't have a problem with them talking about the Israeli hostages. But I haven't seen the Western media talk at all about the Palestinian hostages. And I call them hostages because these people have been kept in custody without a charge, without a trial. They have been detained unlawfully. They have been tortured, raped, and the Western media didn't talk about them. But you, as a special rapporteur, maybe you have some reports on what's actually happening in the Israeli prisons. How many are the Palestinian prisoners or hostages held now in Israel, and why did they hold them hostages?
Before I answer the question, let me say that it's not a case that one of my early reports was about detention, the conditions of Palestinians being arrested and detained by Israel. In exactly 1 year ago, I presented a report to the Human Rights Council denouncing the widespread and systemic arbitrariness of Israel's arrest and detention of Palestinians. And yes, I didn't use the term hostages. It didn't cross my mind, but I do believe that they are de facto hostages of an unlawful occupation. Of course, the terminology we use is different because we use the terminology that is provided by international law. But Israel, and now it's even confirmed by an authoritative opinion of the International Court of Justice, maintains an unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territory. And this unlawfulness taints everything Israel does. The system of arrest and detention was brutal before October the 7th. Israel has arrested and detained almost 1 million Palestinians in 57 years of illegal occupation, 56 years, because a report was issued last year, 56 years of illegal occupation. And I detailed what were the underpinning elements of the system. So it was clear to me that these would provide the perfect, and I use this with a grain of salt, this adjective with a grain of salt, but the perfect ecosystem to mistreat Palestinians after October 7th, where the prevailing feeling against the Palestinians or toward the Palestinians was revenge in Israel. So having said that, yes, I've received reports and allegations of torture and mistreatment of Palestinians taken, abducted, arrested, and detained by Israel since early this year. And together with other special rapporteurs, we have been able to investigate a few cases, especially of women abused, including some who had alleged rape, and we have gone public on this. At the same time, I've seen that was the tip of the iceberg very quickly, but I was already working on my genocide report. And again, I have clearly a capacity issue. You need an army of legal scholars and legal researchers to monitor everything that is happening in occupied Palestinian territory right now. But however, yes, I've seen reports coming up one after the other by Palestinian, Israeli human rights organizations. OHCHR has published a report, UNRWA published a report a few months ago about the abuses that UNRWA staff members have suffered while arrested and detained. And yesterday, B'Tselem published a report denouncing the policy of abusing, humiliating, tormenting, and torturing Palestinian detainees after the 7th of October. So there is a policy, something that is organized, and it's confirmed by the patterns and the scale of violations. So clearly I'm following what happens.
Yes, you know, to be honest with you, today I wanted to read this report by B'Tselem, and I started reading, and I couldn't read it all. I just couldn't, because the testimonies that came from prisons, from the prisoners, from the Palestinian hostages, it's just overwhelming. It's heartbreaking. There were testimonies of rape, of torture, of deprivation of sleep, deprivation of going to the toilet, all sorts of torture. The name of the report is Welcome to Hell. It's actually hell for Palestinians. And I couldn't read all of it. But my question to you again, all of these reports were coming out from Gaza. Many, even before the B'Tselem report, many prisoners that came out from Israeli prisons during this genocide, they came out and they told us, they recorded themselves telling us that dogs were used to rape the Palestinians. And we also had allegations of rape, not allegations of rape, testimony of rape, footage of rape, like the video that was circulated today, this morning, of an Israeli soldiers raping a Palestinian. And at the same time, what annoys me the most is that the Western media is not talking about all of these reports. Why aren't they talking about these reports? Why they only consume themselves talking about the hostages, the Israeli hostages, and they forget about the 10,000 Palestinian hostages that were held unlawfully after the 7th of October?
Um, I'm not sure I'm the best person, I'm the most qualified person to explain why, because I'm not a media expert, but certainly I can tell you that the environment, the dominant environment in the West and in Europe, in my own country, in Italy, is made of censorship and self-censorship when it comes to Israel. And it's like if Israel was considered above the law by many. This is, and I can tell you, this is absolutely unethical, unprofessional, and in a way, it's enabling the continuation of this state of affairs. On the one hand, Israel's unlawful acts, and on the other hand, the support that Israel continues to receive by Western countries, which goes unchecked by, I mean, in their own countries, in their own constituencies.
But we have seen that the media and other influentials who were attacking you personally for these reports. So they did not only publish these reports, and you did a report last year on the detainees, on the prisoners, but at the same time, we have seen some media, we have seen some politicians, pro-Israeli lobbies who are attacking you personally for your reports. Are you scared or intimidated? Will you back down?
Oh, do you see me scared and intimidated? Not at all. Not at all. The more they go after me with spurious allegations, the more it infuriates me, and it becomes very personal because they want to silence me. You cannot silence justice. And justice is my moral imperative, whether they like it or not. This is what drives me. Just this, because I don't have other interest in this. I have a mandate that was conferred upon me by the Human Rights Council, which I highly respect, and I will honor this mandate until I'm done with it.
Well, let's talk about the UN Human Rights Council. Do you think the UN is doing enough to combat the Israeli torture camps of the Palestinians? Is there something else they can do that they aren't doing right now?
No, I don't think the UN is doing enough, but we need to unpack what we mean by UN, because there is the Security Council, which is clearly blocked, is paralyzed by the US veto, and we know that. There are UN agencies which I think are doing what they can under the circumstances, like UNRWA, UNICEF, WHO. They've had unusually outspoken leadership. To an extent, also the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and the pressure on these organizations is enormous. It's not, I mean, you see what happens to me. Everyone who dares criticizing or scrutinizing Israel's human rights records and performance is to face the same challenges and pressure. So what is really disturbing for me is what member states are either not doing or doing. In the sense, there are those who are overtly supporting and enabling Israel at the moment. It's committing a genocide, and there is no question whatsoever. For the record, I think while my report has been criticized by certain countries, I think that in a few years from now, they will have to concur with my analysis, and they will regret not to have taken action and not to have written another kind of history.
But Francesca, I think
let me just a
yeah.
second, because this is important. But I think that the member states who are not taking action, who are sitting idly, either by not imposing unilaterally sanctions on Israel, not suspending the ties with the military, for example, or even with the universities, the fact that Israel continues to be treated as a normal country, this is unacceptable.
Well, that's very powerful. You think Israel should not be treated like a normal country?
No, Israel should face sanctions. Israel should face all the measures that international law afford to correct international wrongdoings. And had it been done before, we wouldn't have had 40,000 people killed in Gaza, and probably wouldn't have had, actually, I'm pretty sure that we wouldn't have had the 7th of October. And what happens to Israel and many innocent Israelis on the 7th of October? Had Israel faced justice once in a long history of unlawfulness?
Well, just for the record, 40,000 killed is the least expectations of the actual toll. The Lancet, which is the leading, the most prominent medical journal, say that it could reach up to 186,000 Palestinians killed directly or indirectly because of the war. But Francesca, you have previously said or mentioned that the UN should deploy a peacekeeping force. Can you tell us more about this?
I've been more nuanced, in fact, because I've said it should deploy an international protective presence. Because a peacekeeping mission, well, first of all, I think that you should be the Palestinians to ask for that, because it's an intrusive, it's an invasive presence, and it cannot and it should not happen without the will of the people. So I defer this to the Palestinian authorities, but also the Palestinian people through the organizations who represent them to ask for it. But what I've asked, and this is absolutely necessary, is a protective presence so that the international who are there act as a protective shell for the Palestinians, because even passive protection, what is called passive protection, the very fact of being there with a conspicuous presence where the settlers that regularly attack the Palestinians, or when and where the army threatens the Palestinian, is a form of protection. So this to say the least. But of course, ideally, there should be a force interposing itself between the Palestinians and the Israelis, pending the withdrawal of the occupation, because Israel cannot delay this further. Israel must withdraw its occupation forces and must end the colonization of the little that remains of Palestine.
And the the recent ICJ ruling said that the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories is illegal. But what does the ICJ say about the right of the Palestinians to resist the occupation? Is the right of the Palestinian people to resist the occupation enshrined in the international law, or is it just terrorism?
look, the court advisory opinion doesn't go into that particularly, doesn't expand on this, but international law is pretty clear about the right to use armed force. The right to resist is enshrined in international law. It's a conquest of those who have fought to liberate themselves from colonialism, and there is a recognition at the international level, including in both the additional protocol to the Geneva Convention and in a number of General Assembly resolutions. There is a recognition that of the right to resist of people who are under oppressive regimes and or apartheid. This is also specifically recognized. It was specifically recognized as a right of the Palestinians since the 70s. And what does it mean? It means that there is a legitimate recourse to force, to the use of force, recognized to the people. You can say this right as a sort of homologue of the right of a state to self-defense. The people have the right to resist, and certainly people whose right to self-determination is undermined and treated. Of course, there are limits, though. There are the limits of international law. So resistance cannot target civilians by killing, brutalizing, kidnapping them. So this is why I've been very, very clear in condemning the act of Hamas or other Palestinian armed groups or civilians that hit Israeli civilians on October 7th. But at the same time, I've said, and I will repeat that, an illegitimate act of the resistance doesn't delegitimize the resistance, while an unlawful occupation thinks of its unlawfulness everything it does, to the point that the International Court of Justice today obliges member states not to recognize legal consequences of what Israel does as an unlawful occupier.
So the international law doesn't always prohibit using violence against regimes or occupations. So when we say that the Palestinians have the right to armed resistance, we're not calling for breaching the international law.
No, technically no. But politically, the point is political. We are not in the decolonization or in the decolonization era. We are in the post 9/11. So now every reference to resistance or armed resistance is interpreted or is labeled as terrorism. This is the dominant political discourse in the West and the rest. So this is why it's so politically unacceptable. But think of it. The most obvious expression of the legalization of the use of force is war. Wars are not ontologically illegal, but they are regulated. Even in wars, there are rules to respect, and it's to preserve a minimum, a modicum of humanity. So same for the peoples have the right to protect themselves when their right of self-determination is at stake. So there is a recognition of armed resistance. In the case of the Palestinians, it's twice more complicated, not just because of what I said, the post 9/11 hostility toward anything that might be referred as a right to resist, but also because with Oslo, the Palestinian Liberation Organization formally renounced violence, renounced armed resistance. Of course, they renounced armed resistance as a condition to have a state, and then the state never materialized, and now they are sort of in a limbo. But from a legal point of view, there is no question that armed resistance is not absolutely prohibited under international law.